You've probably seen this everywhere. People saying they've stopped using moss poles. It's all over TikTok, YouTube, Facebook groups. Moss poles are apparently out. And if you think I'm about to say the same thing, you're wrong. I used to love moss poles. I built my own. I kept them watered with nutrient solution. I extended them as the plants grew. I was all in. But over time, I started to hate them. The maintenance, the constant upkeep, the watering, it just wasn't worth it anymore. But here's the thing, I haven't completely let them go. And if you're wondering whether you should still use moss poles, this video will help you figure that out. By the end, you'll know if they're still worth the effort and how to get results without one if they're not. When I first got into moss poles, I was obsessed. I made my own moss poles with wire mesh and sphagnum moss. I cut them to size and filled them just right. I even built moss balls. They were beautiful. I had pothos and syngoniums climbing those walls like crazy. When I kept my moss poles consistently moist with nutrient solution, the results were incredible. Area roots latched on, the leaves sized up, and everything looked lush. My plants were thriving and those leaves were huge and amazing. But here's what changed. I stopped keeping up with the maintenance. I just didn't have the time it took to keep the moss poles moist. My life priorities changed. I got a lot busier with my kids, my job, making YouTube videos, and quite frankly, keeping moss poles moist was just not on my list of priorities anymore. Since I was not watering the poles, the moss dried out. And once it's dry, most of the benefits disappear. There's poor area root attachments, no nutrient absorption from the moist moss, and the moss pole becomes a glorified, expensive trellis. Of course, I felt guilty. I knew the benefits of using a moss pole. I'd proven them time and time again. I told everyone and their dog to use one. I was telling people one thing and doing another. I began to seriously question my moss pole use choice and consciously decided to change. So I made a shift. I stopped watering them, I stopped extending them, and I stopped adding moss poles to new plants altogether. The funny thing is, nothing fell apart. My plants kept growing. I used other support systems, trellises, metal rods, and the growth was still solid. I knew that moss poles were not essential, especially if they're not maintained properly, but I needed to give myself permission to change. So now I'm phasing them out of my collection, slowly, plant by plant. But, and this is important, I haven't ditched them completely, and that's because of you. Even though I've stopped using moss poles for most of my own plants, I still keep a few around and I still teach about them. Because a lot of you still love moss poles and I get it. When they work, they really work. But here's the problem. Most of the advice out there is made for soil setups. And if you're growing your plant in semi-hydro, a lot of that just doesn't translate. Things like just water the pole when you water the plant doesn't work the same when your plant's already sitting in nutrient solution. Anchoring your moss pole is a little bit harder. Watering needs a different approach. Chopping and replanting gets a little bit tricky. If I stopped using moss poles altogether, I couldn't show you how to actually make them work in your semi-hydro setup. That's why I still use them, so I can teach them properly. And if you're going to use them, I want you to get the best out of them. So let's answer the big question. Should you still use moss poles? Here's what it comes down to. If you're able to keep the moss consistently wet with nutrient solution, if you've got a way to anchor the pole securely and you actually enjoy the process, then moss poles can absolutely be worth it. But if your pole is always dry, if it's flopping around in a lightweight pot, or if it's just stressing you out, it might not be the right fit for your setup right now. And that's totally okay. You don't need a moss pole to grow healthy plants. There are simpler options that give great results with a way less effort. These days, I've swapped most of my moss poles for simpler supports, trellises or clips, or I just let the plant trail naturally. The advantages are that they're easy to set up, they don't need maintenance, and they still keep the plant upright and looking good. And honestly, With the right light, nutrients, and airflow, my plants are still thriving. No moss pole needed. I'm not saying I'll never go back to moss poles. If I ever have the time to maintain them properly, sure, maybe. But right now, this setup works better for me. It's less fuss and the results are still there. One more thing that's worth saying. Not all plants need to climb. There are plenty of houseplants that grow beautifully without a pole, a stake, or any support at all. Plants like calathea, alocasias, philodendron birkins, peace lilies, and even trailing vines like scindapsus can do just fine growing out or down, not up. If you're not getting the growth you want from a climbing plant, it might be a setup issue. But if your plant isn't a climber in the first place, skip the pole altogether. It's one less thing to manage. So, should you use moss poles? It really depends on your setup, your time, and your preferences. They're not essential, but they can be helpful if you use them right. And that's what I care about, helping you grow plants that actually thrive, whether you're using a moss pole or not. If you want to keep using them, I'll show you how to make them work in your system. And if you're ready to try something simpler, I've got tips for that too. And if you haven't already, come join the Facebook group Semi-Hydroponics with the Leca Queen, where we're figuring out all this stuff together.